Early game development is an amazing thing because developers had to work with very little to get a lot out of it, and the environmental artists for Silent Hill were kings at this. One of the greatest examples here is how the water reflections work for light inside the sewers. Looking at this, it looks incredible for a PlayStation 1. I was shocked to see that the water has a shinier glimmer when the water is closer to Harry and his flashlight. Taking the camera out of bounds and underneath the water layer explains everything though. As you can see here, what is really happening is that those pixels that are on the surface that show the shine, those are actually just completely transparent pixels, and the effect is stored underneath the water. So for the initial shine, there's just a giant circle that gives it that dull looking shine, but there's also a very special texture that almost looks like a ghost that is used to make the extra shiny glimmer. Combining these things together makes a PlayStation 1 effect that doesn't eat up a ton on resources. So to recap, this part is just the dull shine, and then this part is the extra shine that is close to the flashlight. Okay, now moving on to the intro so we can get this video started. So first, let's clean up all of this old PlayStation 1 tech so we get a nice clear view, and now we can basically take the camera anywhere we want to try to find secret... Alright, that's a lot of fog. We gotta remove that fog first, so we're gonna remove the fog, and now we can basically take the camera to show you a square, because there is some really, really aggressive culling in Silent Hill. So, alright, that's not terribly exciting. It's exciting to see initially. It's like this is all you can actually see if you were to remove all the fog in Silent Hill. That's awesome, but I think a lot of us would want to see what the entirety of Silent Hill would look like if it was all fully rendered and not called out whatsoever. So what does that look like, and how do we accomplish that? Well, thanks to a level viewer made by Gyromancy in 2019, we can look at the entire extracted town right here, and this is what it would look like. Combining this tool along with the game running in real time with its cutscenes and all of its gameplay, we can now take the camera anywhere we want to try to find secrets and new discoveries to Silent Hill. And with that, let's take a look at what we got. So there is a lot to look at in Silent Hill because there's that dense fog, there is darkness, and then there's also fixed camera angles or a lack of full camera control. And so in situations like this one where there's a Jeep that Henry crashed, you can look over into the Jeep and you can see that there is an interior that the player normally can't see. It only gets shown in pre-rendered cutscenes, not in-game like this. But not only that, if you take the camera behind the Jeep, there is a texture sheet that you can see. It seems to be the taillights of the Jeep, and it's not textured properly, so what ends up happening is you get to see the entire texture sheet in the tiniest form, allowing you to see all the details of the Jeep that are placed over this 3D model. Also, here's something that's really cool. Inside the diner, you can see the outside world, and if you take the camera over, you can see that the road doesn't really go all that far. The reason for this is not for the reasons I told you about earlier. This is because this is actually considered an interior zone. Now, the interior zone does exist in the game world of Silent Hill. In fact, it exists in the same game world as the overworld, and you could travel to it. So, if we use the Jeep as a starting point to figure out where it is, just go over this blocked tunnel, and you'll find immediately after that is this zone with the interior diner. Now, lots of people online ask me to check out what's going on with the scene with the air screamer, because its introduction is a little bit funny in that it smashes through a window and then attacks Harry. Before the air screamer actually goes in the window, I wanted to show you where he is before his tease, which is well underneath the map here. I was able to get him and Harry in the same shot so you can get a relation to where he's supposed to be. After that, he flies by the window and you can see where he goes. He doesn't go all that far up into the sky before he just stops in place. And then I was able to get this entire thing in one shot, which I'm really lucky for, where that exact same model is teleported into the window, causing the scene where you see him smash into the diner. Now, earlier I showed you what it looks like when you take the camera out and you can see the entire town of Silent Hill. However, when you take the camera out and look at the inside of an interior building, like for example the school here, you can see that it's not connected in the same way as Silent Hill would be. All the interior rooms have their own little zone and they're all kind of like in special symmetrical spots. parallel to one another in a lot of ways, but they are by no means connected to each other in the way that you would normally think. A lot of the long hallways seem to be lined up with one another, but they're not connected, and it seems like all the similar rooms seem to be bundled together. Now, one of the things I want to show you is that occasionally there'll be objects that are stored out of bounds. It's not very often because PlayStation 1 games need that ship to be as tight as possible in order for a good-looking game like this to actually run. One way to help with that? Don't have unnecessary polygons or textures, but here's an example on this road off of Bradbury Street, and right behind this building with a garage door is an unused trash bag. Another cool thing I wanted to show you is that just before the boss fight with Twin Feeler, you get distracted by something and you start walking towards it. That thing that you're walking towards before you get trapped are two baby Twin Feelers feeding on a body. And then for the boss fight of Twin Feeler itself, it's a type of boss fight that we love on Boundary Break, one that travels underneath the ground, because the way that developers handle boss fights or enemies like this is always pretty fascinating because they oftentimes do things a little bit differently from one another. With Twin Feeler, it seems that portions of its body get culled out as it goes into the ground. However, it is somewhere underneath the ground, it's just not where you would think. In a lot of games, bosses or enemies like this would just sort of freeze underneath the ground and then teleport to the other spot, or actually move really fast to the other spot. However, in Silent Hill 1, you can see that once it goes into the ground like this, the Twin Feeler gets stored really far below the ground in a completely unrelated spot before it teleports to the next spot that it wants to be at. For fun, I know that a lot of us look at the town of Silent Hill on a map constantly. So just to give you guys a visual representation of that, here's the town of Silent Hill in its real physical form, made to the same scale as the map. And all those different things in the northern side of this map, those are all the interior buildings that you can walk into while you're exploring the town of Silent Hill. Before we take you away from here, I do want to take the camera over into a neighborhood just so that you can get a sense of perspective. I know that just looking at it from an eagle's eye view like that doesn't really quite have the same vibe as taking the camera into a neighborhood afterwards. Over on South Levin Street, if you take the camera all the way to this dead end, you can see a house that's sort of like just about to fall into the ravine. If you take the camera on the other side of it though, you can see another texture sheet. Sadly, for as cool as this texture sheet is, this was not one of the many golden goose texture sheets that I was hoping to find while exploring in this game. What texture sheets am I talking about? Well, over on the cutting room floor, which I will leave a link to in the video description, they have extracted textures that the developers had fun with and had little doodles or notes on. This would have been really cool to find in-game, but sadly, from what I could see, there was no texture sheet that I could find in this game that had any of these amazing texture Easter eggs. Another example of where one map is related to another, there's the rooftop where the key goes down the drain and then you have to go to the schoolyard to go and pick it up. Well, that schoolyard is actually within sight of the drain, but not where you would think. It's not below, it's directly across. And similarly, when you're chasing Cheryl, you might remember that little alleyway that you chase her down to, and you might remember there's a loading zone, quote unquote. Well, if I was to take the camera over around the corner here, you can see that it ends pretty abruptly. However, the actual alleyway that you get loaded into is just right over here, not too far away from where you were before. In fact, that's the secret behind the quick loading times of Silent Hill 1. A lot of these areas are already loaded in. They're just teleporting you to another spot and removing the culling and doing some quick loading. Speaking of Cheryl, by the way, here's the character model that you see early on in the game, and you can get a close-up look at this. Normally, you don't really get a great look at this, but here you can see that she's not wearing shoes, and you see these two little bears on the front of her dress. It looks like they're either holding umbrellas or mushrooms. It's really hard to tell with that. I just wanted to point it out so that you guys at home can make your own decision on that. And now I want to talk about the tale of the missing cat. Now, there's a psych out scene where you open up this locker and a cat jumps out. And weirdly enough, during this cutscene, Harry just sort of stands in place for a little bit too long, and there's a reason for that you don't get a chance to see. Taking the camera over on the other side of the lockers will show you that the camera is hiding the cat running from the end of the room all the way out to the door. The cat does despawn or just gets culled out or whatever as soon as it touches the door, but this is still a running animation and a direction that the cat goes in that the player never gets to see. Similarly, in the Otherworld version of this same exact room, there is a jump scare that's supposed to happen. Now, sadly, taking the camera out of bounds will not show you anything all that interesting because everything gets culled out. The inside of the locker, all of it is just completely culled out, and you do not get to see that body or that locker interior until the cutscene uses it. And here's something that's really interesting. Inside the elevator here, there is an unusually high-res texture, one that the player wouldn't get to see at all, but if you take the camera over to it, you see a tiny little sign that clearly shows you English letters. Now, it doesn't spell out anything special, but I can tell you it says GFDJHGHGKH, and then underneath is what looks to be complete garbage. It's great that I have a chance to show you this sign in particular because down below it is what you normally see for signs in Silent Hill, which is completely undecipherable gibberish. And then fans really wanted me to check out the refrigerator scene, and that makes sense. There's a very forced camera angle that doesn't allow you to see what's inside the refrigerator, and I'm here to show you exactly what's inside. So, much like many things in this game, it is completely culled out until it's used. However, the camera, while it's in use inside the refrigerator, will show you the entirety of this tentacle that seems to drag in Harry, and that it has a base at the bottom of it. And it appears to be the same tentacle monster as the one that you see in this room here. However, the obvious difference here is that it's one tentacle instead of 3. Heading back into the town of Silent Hill, around this corner in this alley area is a giant white prism. Nothing quite like this exists anywhere else in the game. It's very strange. It may have been used to try to cover up something, however, I don't think that was entirely necessary, so its existence is a bit perplexing. And then I just wanted to show you guys what the Midwich Elementary School building looks like on the outside. As you can see, it's not fully modeled, of course, but there's way more detail to this thing than the player obviously ever gets to see. Once again, due to the limited camera, as well as the fog and the nighttime effects. Also, tell me I'm wrong in the comments section. I'm more than happy to be a bit fallible here, but I think that this model of this clock is not shown to the player. They use an image, a pre-rendered image of the clock whenever they need to, but as far as the 3D modeled version of the clock, I don't think you can ever get an angle in which you can see it. Also, I want to take the camera up to dolls. There's a doll here in this room, and it has Mario's shirt and overalls, which is really interesting. I don't think that was meant to be a direct reference to Mario, not even by a long shot, but it's still kind of funny that it matches up pretty well with that. But that's not the only dolls that are in this game. There's also these dolls that are really, really hard to see. Yes, you can kind of see it a little bit cut off from the bottom if you were to play it normally in game. However, there is a lot of detail to these dolls that the players don't normally get to see due to cut off camera angles. In fact, you're not really encouraged to spin the camera around to see these at all. It's very easy for most players to miss that they exist in the first place. And then when you're exploring around inside of houses in the town of Silent Hill, I wanted to take the camera out and just show you how much detail is in these backyards, because obviously you're supposed to be just stuck in one yard. Another example of extra detail here is if we take the camera up to this lighthouse, you can see there's a detail to the top of this building that you definitely cannot see by normal means. And there are many, many examples of the stuff that I just showed you just a second ago. Maybe one day I'll do a more comprehensive video of all the details that are in plain sight that you can get a better look at. But for now, let's move on to tiny details that would be really hard to see, like these jelly beans. These jelly beans were really fascinating to me because I was like, oh, they're so colorful. I wonder if it's just a texture or if somehow they're 3D models. And believe it or not, they are 3D models. We had to slow the footage down, but as you can see here, these jelly beans, though the textures do have rounded shapes on them, they are tiny little prisms that are fully 3D. I just wasn't expecting that. I just thought for sure they would be front-facing billboards of jelly beans. All of it happens so fast too. The other thing that I can mention here is that when they hit the ground, this is a detail that is not seen by the player. Normally the camera cuts off above Harry's knees, but yeah, there is an animation for the jelly beans seconds to hit the ground and start sliding across the floor. And then I just want to show you these moths up close. They have an insanely low level of detail. You still can barely make out what they're even supposed to look like, even at this distance. But it is really cool to see a PlayStation 1 version of a moth. And then I just wanted to take the camera up to some enemy models here, show you what they look like up close. Because again, with the PlayStation 1, you have a lot of aliasing, a lot of strange effects put on the screen, like screen dithering and all this other stuff. There's a lot that masks it in its own right, on top of the fact that the camera's pulled out so far. So with full clarity and taking the camera up close, I just wanted to show you what it all looks like. Another cool detail is inside the diner here. If we take the camera up and over to the back of the diner, you can see a religious figure with tiers of whatever you want to make of it just hanging out above this door. It's very different from the rest of the decor inside of this diner. Here's another enemy up close for you. Again, I just want to take a moment to say that the detail in the original Silent Hill 1 is really, really impressive. It's always shocking to me that this team that made this game were considered the rejects, like the team that Konami had less faith in, because wow, they really turned out a really impressive game. Again, having fun with showing you the original detail of Silent Hill 1. Let's switch from that to HD and take the camera over to Alessa's drawings. The first one has a green monster with a purple person. Fans, tell me what this is supposed to mean. I don't quite get this one. Obviously, my first thought was, oh look, a creeper and the guy from FNAF. But the rest of them kind of make sense. I believe this purple thing is supposed to be the first boss of the game, or it could just be, a random dinosaur. It doesn't necessarily have to be something from the game, but the next one definitely does have to be something from the game. Alessa seemed to have illustrated the final boss, which is really, really cool. It's a neat little amount of foreshadowing and lore building that you can apply to the game itself. I'm sure some of you have noticed, but I just wanted to show it to you guys in full clarity. There is a lot of licensed imagery that is used in Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill 2 when I took a look at it way back in the day. Of course, if you want to see that episode, I'll put a link to that in the video description down below and at the end of the video. But anyways, here we have a picture of clearly Indiana Jones with shoot just written underneath him, which is really funny. Like I said, there's a lot of licensed imagery in this game, but nothing felt more blatant than seeing freaking Harrison Ford of all things. And lastly, I want to talk about Sybil here. There's something really interesting about Sybil. She actually teleports around during this boss fight if you run away from her and she activates the carousel. Now, I could not get any footage of Sybil teleporting on my camera. However, Lance McDonald way back in the day did have his own footage taken off of original PlayStation 1 hardware where it did show off what it looks like for her to teleport. So I'm going to use that clip and just say thank you so much to Lance McDonald. I'll have a link to his Twitter account in the video description down below. And with that, we finally have Silent Hill 1 out of the way. I have a full playlist of other Silent Hill games like 2, 3, and 2 Remake. So if you want to check them out, they're there. And thank you so much for watching. Take care.